Tonight, allow yourself to drift into slumber with a gentle descent into the daily grind of the Roman Empire, a place that might seem glamorous from afar, but, as you'll soon discover, was anything but comfortable for the average person. This story isn't about gladiators, emperors, or grand battles. Instead, we'll explore how truly exhausting, unclean, dangerous, and rigid life could be for ordinary people. It's a sleepy march through history, slow and rhythmic, designed to relax your mind with mildly interesting, deeply repetitive facts. So tuck in, let your eyes grow heavy, and allow the strangely unremarkable realities of Roman daily life to lull you to sleep. We often romanticize Rome, gladiators in polished armor, togas wafting in the Mediterranean breeze, opulent feasts, grand marble villas. But that was a tiny, elite minority. For the vast majority, laborers, slaves, soldiers, and low-level bureaucrats' life was uncomfortable and brutally ordinary. Let's begin with the streets. Rome, the so-called jewel of the ancient world, was filled with noise, smells, and chaos. While impressive aqueducts and temples towered in the distance, the daily experience of a Roman citizen was far more humble. Imagine narrow alleyways choked with foot traffic, merchants yelling prices, carts clattering over uneven stones, and stray dogs weaving between people. It wasn't unusual to see pigs or goats wandering through town either. Their droppings, of course, added to the natural perfume of the urban landscape. Sanitation, even with the famed Roman engineering, was primitive by modern standards. Sewers like the Cloaca Maxima existed, but many homes still emptied chamber pots directly onto the streets. A simple walk to the market could mean dodging waste and runoff, while holding a tunic to your face to block the worst of the smells. The buildings themselves were often crowded together, multi-storied, and made from wood and cheap stone. Fires were common, safety codes non-existent. Living next to a bathhouse might be a slight blessing. Air was a bit more humid and the water more accessible, but also riskier due to the flammable heating systems used. When it rained, the mud mixed with waste to form thick, slippery rivers running down cobbled lanes. In summer, dust settled on everything. Insects thrived year-round. In terms of personal experience, even the perception of beauty in Roman life didn't account for discomfort. Marble floors were cold. Wealthy citizens might adorn their villas with mosaics and frescoes, but for most, walls were bare or whitewashed. No insulation meant winters were bitter and summers were oppressive. And let's not forget the sounds. The Roman streets were a constant orchestra of shouting vendors, hammering blacksmiths, cartwheels over stones, clanging amphorae, and barking animals. Night brought little relief. Rome did not sleep quietly. Criminals, wild dogs, and rowdy revelers continued the soundtrack well past dusk. Without glass windows or insulated walls, every noise found its way into the sleeping quarters. Even basic luxuries were difficult. Water required walking to fountains or cisterns. Heat meant managing a smoky brazier. Privacy was a rare and precious thing. There were no bedrooms as we understand them, just shared sleeping spaces, often with extended family or even strangers if you lived in a boarding arrangement. All this before the day even began. So the next time you imagine living in ancient Rome, perhaps sipping wine under the sun, remember, you'd be more likely sweeping your doorstep, plugging your nose, and trying to avoid slipping in. Street refuse. Morning routines are something we take for granted. A hot shower, a soft towel, a toothbrush with minty paste. But in ancient Rome, cleanliness was a vastly different affair. Let's begin with teeth. Dental hygiene was important to the Romans in theory, but not in comfort. Toothbrushes didn't exist as we know them. People used chewed twigs, cloths, or fingers to rub their teeth with pastes made from ash, crushed bones, oyster shells, or charcoal. The taste, chalky, the texture, gritty, and the effectiveness questionable at best. Breath fresheners included chewing herbs, rinsing with vinegar, or using powdered myrrh. Tooth decay was common, and extractions were performed with forceps, no numbing, no sterilization, just brute strength. Now for the body. Soap as we know it wasn't widely used. Instead, Romans cleaned themselves using oil. They would apply olive oil to the skin, then scrape it off with a tool called a strigilla, curved metal implement that removed sweat, dirt, and oil all at once. The process was messy and time-consuming, and while it technically cleaned the skin, it did nothing for body odor. Bathing took place in public baths, which were social hubs as much as hygiene centers. There were hot rooms, calderia, warm rooms, tepidaria, and cold plunges, frigidaria. Water was heated by hypocaust systems beneath the floors. Sounds luxurious, right, until you consider that hundreds of people used the same water. Skin diseases and infections spread easily. Towels were communal, soap was rare, and personal grooming was often done in full view of others. Privacy wasn't expected. Barbers, who also performed minor surgeries and tooth extractions, worked publicly. A shave, a haircut, a mole removal, all done next to someone else getting their toenails trimmed. Even the wealthy dealt with challenges. Private baths were expensive and rare. Heating water took immense effort. Slaves often handled the bathing preparations, so being rich meant outsourcing the discomfort. Clothing maintenance also tied into hygiene. Laundry was performed at Thessaloniki, public laundries where garments were stomped in tubs of urine, prized for its ammonia content. Clean clothes, but again, the smell lingered. Infestations were common, lice, fleas, and bedbugs. Delousing was part of daily grooming. Ointments and oils might repel some pests, but eradication was nearly impossible. And finally, the latrines. Public toilets were shared benches with open holes, flushed by running water beneath. The communal sponge on a stick, called a tersorium, served as toilet paper. It was rinsed in a vinegar or saltwater bucket between uses. These facts aren't meant to shock, they're meant to soothe. There's something sleepy about realizing how slowly life moved, how repetitive routines were, and how unpleasant normality could be. As you close your eyes, imagine scraping your skin with oil and metal, rinsing your mouth with vinegar, and hoping the towel you picked up was someone else's footcloth. And somehow, through all this, the Romans endured, generation after generation. If you imagine yourself enjoying a Roman meal under a shaded pergola, sipping wine and nibbling figs, let us paint a more realistic picture more suited to inducing sleep than envy. Because while Romans did have some delicious ingredients, the experience of eating and the dietary norms of the time could be strange, restrictive, and downright unappetizing by modern standards. Roman diets were shaped heavily by geography, status, and season. The Mediterranean climate allowed for a reasonable array of grains, fruits, legumes, and vegetables. Staples included wheat, particularly for bread and porridge, barley, lentils, chickpeas, onions, garlic, leeks, cabbage, and olives. Meat was a luxury. Fish and shellfish were more common, particularly salted or pickled, and fermented fish saucigar was everywhere. Garum deserves special attention. Made by layering fish parts with salt and leaving them to ferment under the sun, it was then strained into a dark, pungent liquid. Used much like soy sauce or ketchup today, garum added a sharp, umami flavor to Roman cooking, but it smelled strongly. The factories where it was produced were placed outside city centers for a reason. Even wealthy Romans rarely had the foods we consider everyday basics. No tomatoes, no potatoes, no chocolate, no corn, no coffee. These crops were native to the Americas and wouldn't arrive in Europe for more than a millennium. A typical Roman day had three main eating events: intaculum breakfast, prandium mid-day meal, and cena dinner. Breakfast might be bread dipped in wine or honey, sometimes olives or cheese. Prandium was light fruit, bread, cold meats if available. Cena, the main meal, could be elaborate in elite homes, but was far simpler for commoners. For the lower classes, dinner was a repetition of earlier meals. Bread, a bean porridge or vegetable stew. Occasionally, salted meat or dried fruit added variety. Spices were expensive and, even when available, used in modest amounts. Wine was consumed throughout the day, but always watered down. Drinking it undiluted was frowned upon and considered barbaric. Quality varied wildly, and additives like resin or herbs were common. Cooking was hard work. Most homes lacked full kitchens, especially in crowded insulae apartment buildings. Instead, people relied on communal ovens or simple braziers. Fires were dangerous. Smoke filled living spaces. There was no refrigeration, and storage meant salting, drying, or fermenting. Cooking vessels were made from bronze, clay, or iron. Spits, pots, and rudimentary ovens were used, often outdoors. Utensils were few. Knives, ladles, and hands did most of the work. Recipes were often improvised. The ancient cookbook attributed to Apicius includes elaborate dishes, but was far removed from daily reality. Most meals were repetitive, seasonal, and based on what hadn't spoiled. Formal dining involved reclining on couches, but only for free men. Women and slaves sat or stood. Servants brought dishes, cleared plates, and poured drinks. Hands were the main eating tools. Forks were virtually unknown. Napkins sometimes, clean hands if you remembered. Talking during meals was expected. Topics ranged from philosophy to politics to gossip. Vomiting to make room for more fuda click, often misattributed, was exaggerated but not wholly absent at elite banquets. Most people, however, ate quietly, hunched over bowls, and hoped for seconds. Without refrigeration, spoilage was constant. Romans used salt, vinegar, honey, and smoke to preserve food. Even so, gastrointestinal issues were common. Foodborne illness wasn't well understood. Mold and pests thrived. Grains were sometimes contaminated with ergot or insect larvae. For the very poor, food could be foraged-willed herbs, berries, even insects in desperate times. Bread riots were not uncommon, particularly in cities where grain supplies faltered. So as you settle in to sleep tonight, picture a Roman peasant squatting beside a fire, stirring a bubbling pot of lentils, the smell of fermented fish in the air, the clatter of amphorae, the crackle of kindling. It was sustenance, not pleasure. It was hard, earned, and it was very, very boring. Close your eyes and imagine the rhythm of repetitive meals, the quiet clink of pottery bowls, and the slow scrape of spoons across rough wooden surfaces. Tonight, as the night air cools and your bed offers a gentle reprieve, let us quietly journey through the laborious world of Roman employment. Far removed from the marble corridors of power or the grandeur of the Senate, most Romans had jobs that were monotonous, brutal, physically exhausting, or flat out dangerous. You'll soon see why very few of these would appeal to the modern worker, why even imagining them might lull your mind into slumber. The most common Roman jobs were also the most tedious. Imagine standing at the Forum at sunrise, hoping someone needs help hauling bricks, digging ditches, or carrying amphorae. Day laborers had no guarantees, no unions, no contracts, no certainty they'd find work at all. If they were hired, it meant back, breaking labor under the hot sun for a handful of coins. They carried water from wells to upper-floor apartments, unloaded grain shipments at docks, cleaned cesspits with long poles, or mixed lime for construction. There were no safety standards. Collapses, injuries, and infections were common, and if you couldn't work the next day, you didn't eat. Food, shelter, clothing, everything depended on being able to toil every day, often with no days off. Injuries weren't compensated. Sickness meant starvation. In ancient Rome, laundry was an entire industry. The workers, called fullones, their job was to wash dirty tunics, cloaks, and linens, and their primary tool was human urine. Urine contains ammonia, a natural cleanser. It was collected from public urinals and mixed with water in large vats. Clothes were stomped on in these vats, a sort of pungent foot-powered wash cycle. After soaking, they were rinsed, beaten, and laid out in the sun. It was smelly, physically taxing, and exposed workers to constant chemical burns and respiratory problems. Still, fullers were part of a necessary trade, and large cities had entire districts dedicated to their work. Another group of professionals whose work was both vital and noxious were the tanners. They turned animal hides into leather, but the process involved soaking skins in urine and animal dung, then scraping them clean. Tanneries were located well outside urban centers, partly due to the unbearable stench and partly due to the runoff and waste. Flies, disease, and filthy working conditions made the job undesirable, but tanned leather was crucial for sandals, armor, belts, and bags. Tanners were often stigmatized for their odor. It lingered, no matter how much they bathed. Imagine descending into a pitch-black tunnel carved into a mountainside, the air thin and dusty, your only light a flickering oil lamp. Roman miners worked in silver, gold, copper, and salt mines, and the work was relentless. Many miners were slaves or criminals sentenced to labor. They dug narrow shafts, often with no ventilation, and hauled baskets of stone or ore to the surface. Tunnel collapses, asphyxiation, or simple exhaustion claimed countless lives. Salt mines, especially, were notorious. Inhaling salt dust damaged lungs, causing a slow, painful suffocation. Most who entered the mines never returned. Bread was the cornerstone of Roman diets, and bakers worked night shifts to ensure fresh loaves by dawn. Ovens were large and extremely hot, and kneading dough for hundreds of loaves was strenuous. Accidents with flames and blades were common. Most bakeries were family-run, cramped, and loud. Slaves or children often did the grunt work, and yet, despite the necessity of their labor, bakers were low in social rank. Rome didn't build itself. Builders laid roads, aqueducts, homes, baths, and temples. They mixed lime concrete, shaped bricks, and heaved marble slabs. Construction zones were chaotic. Scaffolding was rudimentary. Injuries were constant. Cement dust irritated eyes and lungs. And while the results were grand, the laborers remained nameless. Skilled masons had slightly higher status, but most worked long days for modest pay. Rome's glory, quite literally, stood on their backs. Rome's fire, Brigadeth Vigiles, was made up largely of slaves and freedmen. They patrolled the city at night with buckets and axes, responding to frequent blaze in the wooden, overcrowded apartment blocks. Fires were common and deadly. Buckets passed in chains offered little control. The Vigiles also doubled as rudimentary police, breaking up brawls and catching thieves. It was thankless, risky work, and since many Romans were suspicious of authority, the Vigiles were often despised. While gladiators are the subject of legend, their trainers and caretakers lived in a grim world. Ludus managers oversaw brutal training regimens. Injuries, deaths, and punishments were part of the job. Medical care was primitive. Animal keepers handled lions, bears, and exotic beasts imported for the arena. They fed them, caged them, and led them into battle. If the animal turned, the keeper often died. You might think teaching was an easy job at Roman teachers, especially those instructing the children of plebeians, earned little and were poorly treated. They worked in cramped rooms or even outdoors, wrangling dozens of students without books, desks, or discipline. Tutors for wealthy families had better conditions but no job security. A tutor could be dismissed on a whim or blamed for a child's failure. These jobs were not aspirational, they were survival. The Roman economy was built on the backs of slaves, the desperation of freedmen, and the toil of commoners. If you couldn't work, you were discarded. So as you lie in bed, think of the fullers stomping in vats of urine, the miners coughing in the dark, the bakers sweating in preed, on ovens. The rhythm of labor, the repetition of motion, the echo of hammers and footsteps and shovels. Let that repetition carry your mind toward rest, lulled by the mundane yet unyielding force that powered an empire not with glory, but with grit. As your body settles into stillness and your thoughts begin to quiet, let us drift into another slow chapter of ancient Roman life, medicine. If you're feeling a tickle in your throat or a little ache in your head, be grateful you don't live in the Roman Empire, because back then, getting sick didn't mean a visit to a skilled doctor or a comforting pharmacy. It meant guesswork, superstition, and treatments that might make things worse. Tonight, let us quietly observe the strange, ineffective, and sometimes terrifying world of Roman medicine. A world where the line between doctor and magician was blurred, and where a simple cold might lead to some leeches and prayers to Mercury. Most Roman doctors weren't highly trained professionals. Many were slaves or freedmen, learning through apprenticeship rather than formal education. There were no licenses, no governing bodies to enforce standards. Anyone could call themselves a medicus. Some did have training from Greek medical texts, especially the works of Hippocrates and later Galen, but applying theory to practice was inconsistent. Wealthier Romans might hire private physicians, while the poor relied on local healers, midwives, or home remedies. The most skilled doctors served in the military, where they treated wounds, amputated limbs, and stitched up soldiers. But even these experts operated without anesthesia, antiseptics, or reliable instruments. Pain was expected. Infection was common. Roman medicine was based on the Greek theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness, it was believed, resulted from an imbalance among these bodily fluids. So if you had a fever, too much blood, the solution, bloodletting. If you were sluggish or depressed, too much black bile, you might be prescribed vigorous exercise, purgatives, or a change in diet. If you had congestion, that meant too much phlegm. Prepare for steam baths, vomiting, or perhaps a mustard plaster. There was a treatment for everything, but little actual understanding of germs, viruses, or hygiene. It was trial and error, and mostly error. Let us list some popular Roman treatments. Let the absurdity carry you slowly into dreamland. Bloodletting, performed with knives, leeches, or cupping glasses, believed to restore balance, cauterization, burning wounds or growths shut with hot metal rods. Purgatives and emetics, medicines designed to make you vomit or purge your bowels. Herbal remedies, mixed with wine or oil. Ingredients included garlic, mint, opium, and sometimes lead. Urine therapy, used to clean wounds or even prescribed to drink in small quantities. Magic spells and amulets, because sometimes only divine intervention would do. Imagine a surgical operation without anesthesia. Roman surgeons had tool scalpels, forceps, bone saws, but no pain relief beyond wine or opium, and no knowledge of sterilization. Operations were limited mostly to surface injuries. Deep surgeries were rare and often deadly. Cataract removal, done with a needle, amputation, a saw, and a strong assistant to hold the patient down. Wounds were dressed with honey, which has mild antibacterial properties, but infections were common. There were no antibiotics. Survival depended on luck and a strong immune system. For women, most medical care came from midwives. Childbirth was dangerous, and mortality rates were high. Complicated deliveries had few options. Midwives relied on herbs, massage, and experience. There were written manuals, but outcomes depended on luck. There were no ultrasounds, no C-sections except post-mortem, and no epidurals. Women also sought treatments for fertility, contraception often ineffective, and menstrual issues. Remedies included wool tampons soaked in wine, charms, or abstinence during certain moon phases. The Romans didn't understand mental illness in modern terms. Melancholy, hysteria, or mania were considered imbalances of humors or worse, signs of possession or divine punishment. Treatments ranged from isolation to bloodletting to music therapy. Some turned to temples and priests. Others were locked away. Public health in Rome did exist to an extent. Aqueducts brought clean water and sewers removed waste. But city life was crowded, dirty, and disease-ridden. Public baths helped with hygiene but also spread illness. Epidemics swept through regularly. Doctors couldn't stop them. Quarantines were rare, and understanding of contagion was minimal. Rich Romans could retreat to country villas. The poor stayed, packed in insulae apartment blocks, where illness spread quickly. Rome suffered numerous plagues, including the Antonine Plague, 165 AD, and the Plague of Cyprian, 250 AD. Tens of thousands died, panic spread, people blamed foreigners, gods, or moral decay. Priests offered sacrifices. Doctors tried old remedies, none worked. Life expectancy in Rome was short. Many died young, and even the wealthy weren't safe. A fever, a cough, a wound any of these could be fatal. So as you close your eyes and your breath slows, think of a Roman waking with a sore throat. Their options, a bleeding bowl, a bitter potion, a whisper to the gods. Medicine was a gamble, and most gambles lost. Let that uncertainty ease you into the arms of sleep. There's nothing more restful than knowing you won't be prescribed warm urine or a mustard seed enema in the morning. Picture the setting sun over a bustling Roman city. The stone streets hum with the quiet murmur of commerce winding down, and soon the day's last glow fades behind tiled rooftops. As night falls, you return to your home, not a villa with lush gardens, but a multi-story apartment block or insula, crammed with neighbors, goats, stale bread, and the faint hope that the wooden ceiling won't collapse during the night. Tonight, let's gently descend into the architectural nightmares and fire-prone realities of Roman apartment living. Let each creaking floorboard and flickering oil lamp guide you toward restful, if slightly anxious, slumber. Insulae were multi-story apartment buildings that housed most of the urban Roman population. Think of them as the Roman equivalent of tenements, cheaply built, densely packed, and often lacking in comfort or even safety. Constructed from brick, wood, mud, and sometimes recycled stone, these buildings could be 4, 5, or even 6 stories high. The wealthiest lived on the ground floor, close to fresh water and far from danger. The poorest climbed narrow staircase to top floors that swayed in the wind and leaked when it rained. You see, Roman building regulations were often ignored. Developers sought profit over quality, and inspectors could be bribed. As a result, collapses were common. In fact, the Roman writer and philosopher Seneca remarked on this instability, noting that residents often moved from building to building simply because each one would eventually fall apart. If your ceiling didn't crack this week, your neighbors might. Building codes under Emperor Augustus attempted to limit heights, but enforcement was weak. After all, Rome was growing and space was tight. Imagine trying to sleep under a wooden beam that creaks ominously when the wind blows. That's your lullaby, but if the building didn't collapse, it might catch fire. Open flames were everywhere, cooking, heating, lighting all done with fire. Oil lamps, charcoal braziers, and stoves filled the insulae. Add dry wood, straw bedding, and thin walls, and you had the perfect recipe for disaster. Fires spread quickly, especially through the upper floors. Residents had little time to escape, and few buildings had anything resembling a fire escape. There were no fire alarms, no emergency exits, just shouting and stampeding feet in narrow corridors. And if a fire started while you were asleep, you might not wake up in time. Cooking was done in cramped spaces, often shared by multiple families. Chimneys were rare, so smoke filled the rooms. In many cases, there was no proper kitchen at all. A family might have a small clay stove in a corner, balanced on bricks. Food spilled, oil dripped, embers rolled, and with no refrigerators, food spoiled quickly, attracting flies and rats. Bread was often stale. Meat was salted or dried beyond recognition. Imagine trying to sleep while someone next door attempts to roast fish on a brazier. Smoke seeps into your room, the fire crackles, someone coughs, you roll over, grateful you're only visiting in your imagination. If the architecture didn't get you, the aroma might. Toilets weren't inside the apartments. Residents used chamber pots, which were emptied sometime, into the street. Lower floors near the latrines bore the brunt of the stench. In summer, the heat made it worse. Urine, feces, spoiled food, body odor, animal waste all mingled in the air. Occasionally, a night jar of waste was tossed from a window with only a shout of warning. Cave canem might mean beware the dogbutt in the insulae. You also had to beware the airborne excrement. Privacy was a luxury, walls were thin, neighbors were close. Arguments, crying infants, barking dogs, and street vendors shouting their wares echoed through the building. Some rooms had no windows, some had no doors. Curtains divided spaces. Families of 5 might share one small room. Sleep was interrupted often, yet, amid the chaos, there was community. People shared what little they had. Children played in the alleys. Stories were whispered by lamplight. Bread was broken together. Water came from fountains in the street or from rooftop cisterns. Carrying water up 5 flights of stairs was daily exercise. To bathe, you'd go to the public baths. Toilets down the street. If you were ill, old, or unlucky, you used a pot. Sanitation was a constant struggle. Bugs were common. Mold grew on damp walls, and rats and lice, always present. If you scratched at night, it wasn't dreams, it was fleas. The insula offered little security. Locks were basic. Theft was common. Fires often started from arson, drunkenness, or careless cooking. Some residents joined vigilante groups to patrol their neighborhoods. Others just hoped for luck. The urban poor lived in fear of fire, collapse, and crime. Street gangs sometimes claimed alleys. The city had a rudimentary police force, but enforcement was inconsistent. In winter, the cold seeped in. Without insulation, the brick and wood walls offered little protection. You huddled near a brazier, adding fuel carefully to avoid a spark that might light your straw mattress. In summer, the top floors roasted. There was no ventilation, no fans. You opened a window and hoped the night breeze didn't carry the smell of the latrine. Sleep came, but it was restless. Dreams danced with firelight and echoes of shouting neighbors. So here we are, in your tiny, dimly lit room atop a wobbly 5-story firetrap. The mattress is thin, the air is heavy, and someone is boiling lentils too close to their curtain. The charm of Roman civilization fades when you realize this is how most people lived, not in marble villas, but in cramped, flammable cubicles. Life here wasn't just hard, it was risky, noisy, and uncomfortable. Let that discomfort guide you toward sleep. Be grateful for your mattress, your solid walls, your indoor plumbing. The insulae are long gone, but their stories remain quiet reminders of how far comfort has come. Close your eyes now and picture a gentle Roman morning. You wake not to birdsong or the rustle of leaves, but to the distant roar of thousands of people. A wave of noise that builds slowly, like thunder echoing through stone canyons. You live near the Colosseum, or maybe one of the smaller arenas. And today is a spectacle day. In the Roman Empire, public entertainment wasn't just common, it was constant. But while the word entertainment might suggest a cheery theater show or a relaxing stroll through a park, the Roman idea of fun was different. It was louder, bloodier, and more exhausting than you can imagine. Tonight, let's wander through this ancient world of drama and death, of cheering crowds and gruesome games, and let the strange discomfort of these public pastimes gently nudge you into the safe distance of dreams. Imagine you're in the crowd at the Colosseum. The seats are stone, the sun is hot, and you've been sitting for hours. There are no individual seats, just slabs. You brought a cushion if you're lucky. If not, your backside will grow numb before noon. Romans didn't just come to these shows for the bloodshed. They came for each other, the socializing, the fashion, the betting. The buzz of the masses was the warm-up act. Senators in their fine togas, slaves sent ahead to hold seats, fruit vendors shouting over the din. It's a crush of people, sweat, dust, and anticipation, and the best seats, those went to the elite. The higher up you were, literal, the less important you were. The poor crowded at the top in the full sun, squinting to see the action below. You've seen movies with heroic gladiators, but the reality was less glamorous. Gladiators were usually slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war. Trained in special schools, they fought in carefully choreographed, though still deadly battles for the crowd's amusement. Their weapons varied. The Murmillo with his heavy shield and fish-shaped helmet, the Rushirius with a net and trident, and the Secutor, shaped for speed and brutal clashes. Some became popular almost like celebrities, but they had no control over their lives, and though they were admired, they were still property. They trained relentlessly, fought to exhaustion, and often died before reaching old age. The audience could be brutal. They shouted for blood. If a gladiator fell, the crowd sometimes voted on whether he should be spared. The emperor might give a signal, thumbs up or down. Imagine trying to nap with the roar of 50 zeros. Zero people chanting for someone's death. It's not exactly peaceful. Next come the Venetian Eswilled animal hunts staged in arenas. This wasn't a safari, it was slaughter. Lions, tigers, bears, leopards, ostriches, even crocodiles, imported from across the empire, were brought in by the hundreds. Special trapdoors and elevators released them onto the sand. Some were made to fight each other. Others were pitted against human hunters or criminals with no training. Sometimes they were starved beforehand. Sometimes they were blinded or drugged. Roman spectators watched as chaos unfolded, beasts roaring, men screaming, blood soaking the ground. And the morning shows often included executions by beast. Condemned criminals, tied to stakes or thrown into the arena unarmed, faced wild animals as a public warning. It was terrifying, but it was also entertainment. The day wasn't even half over. You'd think the Romans might break for lunch. And they did, but not before a spectacle. Midday shows were often reserved for executions. They weren't private, somber affairs. They were woven into the day's eventsal, most like intermissions. Crucifixions, burnings, beheadings. Some were theatricomade to match mythological tales. A man might be dressed as Icarus, only to be thrown from a high platform. Another as Prometheus, chained and attacked by a trained bird. Sometimes convicted criminals were forced to reenact tragic myths, knowing full well the story ended in their actual death. The crowd watched, ate, cheered, occasionally jeered, and then more games. Now picture the Circus Maximus, where up to 150 Romans packed in for chariot races. Imagine the thunder of hooves, the blur of color-shrid, green, blue, and white of 4 teams. Chariots zoomed around the elongated track, 7 laps at blinding speed. Drivers risked their lives at every turn. Crashes were frequent. Chariots overturned. Drivers were dragged, trampled, crushed. People had favorite teams. Factions could turn violent. Riots sometimes broke out in the stands. Political grudges spilled over in racing arenas. The horses suffered too, whipped to go faster, crashed into barriers, broken legs. And no recovery. The excitement masked the danger. The cheering drowned out the injuries, and when a driver fell, the crowd shouted, but not to help. They wanted to see if he would stand again or not. Roman theaters weren't always spaces for noble tragedy or elegant comedy. They had those, of course, plays by Plautus or Terence, comedies with mistaken identities, body humor, and slapstick gags. But the crowds, often loud, impatient, and unruly. Actors were not highly respected. Many were slaves or freedmen. Costumes were simple, and performances could be interrupted by heckling. In fact, some shows included real violence. Mythical deaths acted out using condemned prisoners who were actually killed on stage. Plays became a strange hybrid of drama and execution. And remember, there were no microphones, no lights. Theater was shouted, open air, and exhausting. So much for a quiet evening. Romans loved festivals. They had dozens every year. Saturnalia, Lupercalia, Floralia, and many more. Some lasted days, some involved gift, giving, or public feasts. Others featured parades, drunken revelry, or even temporary social role reverse house masters serving slaves. While this might sound fun, it was also noisy, crowded, and exhausting. People shouted in the streets, drank to excess, and sometimes rioted. For the average Roman, festivals were not optional. Shops closed. Temples buzzed. Crowds surged. You couldn't escape the noise or KS7 if you wanted to. And by the end, many people just wanted to sleep, not from joy but from sheer fatigue. So let's return to your quiet modern bed. No roaring crowds, no bloody sand, no lions under the floorboards. Roman entertainment was relentless. It was physical, dangerous, and often disturbing. It demanded stamina from the performer and the audience. Even watching was tiring, days spent on hard stone benches, nights processing what you'd seen. If you lived in Rome, entertainment wasn't a break from life. It was life noisy, chaotic, terrifying life. So as you drift off now, be thankful for boring TV, for sleepy podcasts, for soft chairs and quiet weekends, because in ancient Rome, your day off probably involved a decapitation. Let that thought lull you into safe, quiet sleep. Let your thoughts drift into the Roman market, place known as the Forum just as the sun breaks over red, tiled roofs. You're hungry, your shoes are worn, and your coin pouch feels lighter than you remember. Welcome to a typical Roman morning errand, where simply buying food was a gauntlet of smells, sounds, and the ever-present risk of being swindled. Shopping wasn't relaxing, it wasn't quiet, and it certainly wasn't easy. In this chapter, we'll saunter slowly and sleepily through the erratic, chaotic, and downright exhausting experience of daily Roman shopping. Imagine walking into a modern grocery store. There's a checkout, prices on tags, fresh produce in nice rows. Now erase all of that. In Rome, you headed into a dusty, bustling, open-air market. Vendors shouted from stalls, selling everything from live chickens to stale garum sauce. There were no set prices. You haggled for everything, and if you didn't know how to argue convincingly, you paid double. Imagine trying to buy a head of lettuce while someone next to you is loudly auctioning off fermented fish paste. Romans didn't have refrigeration, milk spoiled by noon, fish reeked before it hit the stall, bread was often rock, hard by day's end. Flies buzzed, rats scurried, vendors might soak old meat in wine to mask the smell or reheat old porridge, and sell it as fresh. You couldn't trust a peer ancestor your nose, and once you bought it, You had to get it home in the heat, through crowded streets, dodging carts, dogs, and open sewers. Romans used coinsmony kinds, as sestertius, denarius, aureus, different metals, different values. Some vendors accepted only certain coins. Others tried to cheat buyers with underweight fakes. You had to count your change carefully, very carefully. And heaven help you if you dropped a coin in the gutter. Someone would snatch it before you could blink. There were no carts or bags provided. You brought your own baskets if you were smart. And if you bought flour, vegetables, and oil, you carried it all home yourself or paid a porter. But porters weren't always trustworthy. Some disappeared with the goods. Others demanded tips or threatened to drop your food in the mud. Picture juggling jars of olive oil while sidestepping a goat and dodging a runaway cart. Not exactly a stress-free shopping spree. Oh, the smells. Raw fish, drying meat, spices, manure, sweat, moldy grain, and overflowing chamber pots from nearby apartments. Even strong perfumes and incense couldn't fully mask the bouquet. And in summer, the scent reached new hychot, scior, clinging to your tunic as you tried to breathe through your sleeve. Some vendors diluted wine with water. Others stuffed grain sacks with pebbles. You had to taste, sniff, and inspect everything. Weights and measures weren't standardized. That pound of lentils, possibly only 3/4. Unless you carried your own weights, you were at their mercy. Even scales were often rigged. Markets were social hubs. You might run into your neighbor, your landlord, your lover, and your rival while bartering for cheese. You had to look presentable, even if your tunic was threadbare. And while your attention was on haggling, thieves prowled. A coin pouch left loose, gone. Some even cut holes in baskets to let fruit fall out, then snatched it up. Some foods were delicacies, but also dangerous. Mushrooms were prized, but many were poisonous. Shellfish spoiled quickly and often caused illness. Romans had little understanding of food safety. If something made you sick, you probably blamed the gods. That exotic stew might just send you straight to the nearest communal latrine. Water, flour, firewood, wine, vegetables weren't all in one place. You walked from one vendor to another, often across town. It could take hours, and if it rained, the streets turned to mud. Your sandals sank, your tunic got splashed. Sometimes you arrived only to find your vendor had sold out, or closed early, or raised prices because of a rumor about pirates. Modern shopping may have its annoyances: long lines, bad music, slow why. But at least you aren't elbow deep in sire garum while arguing about the price of onions. Roman shopping was a daily test of endurance, bargaining skill, and olfactory tolerance. You needed street smarts, patience, and a strong stomach. So tonight, as you rest your head, be thankful for grocery carts, credit cards, and refrigeration. Let the chaos of the Roman market fade into the quiet hum of your modern fridge. Sleep well. There's no need to wake early to chase fresh fish before the sun cooks it. As you settle into the quiet, dim corner of your room and prepare for sleep, allow your thoughts to drift to the ancient Roman roads. They crisscrossed the empire like veins over 250 miles of them. Glorious engineering, you may have heard. But glorious for whom? Tonight, we're not focusing on the legions or dignitaries riding on fine carriages. We're walking, trudging, bouncing, and sweating alongside the common folk, those who face travel the hard way. Welcome to a journey through the transportation woes of the Roman Empire. If you think commuting is tough today, wait until you try it Roman style. Roman roads were a marvel. Laid with stone, gravel, and mortar, they connected the vast empire efficiently. But efficient doesn't mean comfortable. The stones were uneven, the surface is hard. There were no shock absorbers. Whether on foot, ox cart, or mule, the journey was jarring. The cobbled surface rattled carts until the wheels splintered. Pedestrians developed sore feet from the relentless pounding. Even horses stumbled on the irregular stones. And unlike modern sidewalks, there was no dedicated pedestrian lane. You walked alongside creaking carts, panicked goats, and soldiers on patrol. Imagine you've packed your goods onto a wooden cart. It's not elegant, it creaks. The wheels are thick and solidno rubber. Your ox or mule plods along at a generous pace of 2 miles per hour. There's no suspension, no seat padding. You bounce with every rut. Dust kicks into your eyes, your back aches, and at every town gate you may need to pay a toll or bribe the guard. Worse, carts weren't allowed inside many cities during daytime hours. Traffic congestion wasn't just a modern issue. You might arrive only to wait until dusk to enter. For most Rome, and especially the poor-foot travel, was the only option. You walked and walked and walked. Distance is where long Rome to Naples, over 140 miles. That's about a week on foot, if you're lucky. You carried everything on your back or on a pack animal if you could afford one. The roads were hot by day, cold at night. Rain turned the dirt into muck, and if you didn't time your journey well, you might end up sleeping outside the city gates or in a roadside ditch. Bandits were common outside city limits. If you looked well, or even just well, you might be targeted. Traveling in groups helped, but wasn't always possible. The Mediterranean and the Empire's rivers were filled with boats, but they weren't speedy or reliable. Merchant ships moved slowly, and their schedules depended on the wind. No wind, you waited. Sailing season was limited generally from March to October. Try it outside that window and you risked storms, shipwrecks, or worse. There were no cabins for passengers. You curled up wherever space allowed, often next to livestock or barrels of wine. The smell was overpowering. Sea sickness was common. And if pirates boarded your vessel, you had little chance. The Roman navy existed, but it didn't escort every ship. Let's say you're lucky enough to travel by land and reach a town by nightfall. You seek shelter. Inns were available, but few were pleasant. Inns were loud, cramped, and expensive. Fleas infested the beds. The food was stale or suspicious. Fights broke out easily. Theft was common. Some inns doubled as brothels. Others housed livestock in adjoining rooms. Rest was elusive. That's why many preferred to sleep outdoors or with friends if they had any along the route. You think GPS is unreliable. In Rome, there were milestones, but maps were rare. Directions came from locals, and accuracy varied. A town just over the hill might actually be a day's march away. Paths split unexpectedly. Flooded roads became impassable. Travelers were often lost, and when you asked for help, you risked being mocked or misled, especially if you looked like a clueless out-of-towner. Donkeys and mules were common, camels in the east. Oxen pulled heavy carts, but these animals needed care, feeding, rest. Overload them, and they refused to move. Treat them poorly, and they died. You couldn't just go faster. And if your animal got sick, you either found a local who could help or you carried the load yourself. Disease is spread between animals easily. Plagues wiped out entire mule populations, causing trade slowdowns. Rome loved a good tax. Roads passed through checkpoints and toll stations. Some were official, others less so. If a soldier decided your papers were insufficient or you looked suspicious, you paid extra or waited. Bribes smoothed many journeys, but bribes cost money, and even with one, delays were constant. You might spend hours negotiating just to pass a bridge. At night, the roads were perilous. There were no lamps, no police, only torches or moonlight. Criminals roamed the countryside after dusk. Travelers who didn't make it to a safe haven before dark often vanished without a trace. Most people avoided night travel unless absolutely necessary, and when they did, they traveled in armed groups. Today, we complain about traffic and delayed flights. But at least you're not walking 40 miles with a sack of grain on your back. Roman transportation was slow, physically demanding, and dangerous. You needed strength, luck, and a tough stomach. So tonight, as you fall asleep, be grateful for padded seats, rest stops, and road signs. No need to grease your ox cart wheels or worry about bandits. Let the slow rumble of distant carts and the creak of leather sandals fade into a restful silence. As you prepare to settle deeper into the calm embrace of the night, let your mind drift toward the bustling baths of ancient Rome. Imagine yourself standing at the entrance of a large, steamy building filled with the chatter of dozens of people, splashing water, and the faint scent of olive oil and sweat. Bathing in the Roman Empire was not the private, relaxing experience we know today. It was a social event, a necessity, and sometimes a trial of patience and tolerance. Tonight, we explore why bathing in Rome was less about hygiene and more about social standing, spectacle, and often discomfort. And as you listen, feel the slow ebb of your thoughts, like the gentle ripples in a lukewarm bath. Roman bath houses called thermae were massive complexes. They were not just places to get clean, but also hubs of social life, exercise, business deals, and gossip. You entered a grand building with marble columns, mosaics, and pools of various temperatures. But for the average Roman peasant or laborer, access was limited or often uncomfortable. The wealthy had private baths in their villas, but most Romans shared public baths that could accommodate hundreds. These baths were free or inexpensive, but crowded, noisy, and unsanitary. Imagine stepping into a steam room so hot and humid you can barely breathe. Around you, people of all classes and conditions chatted loudly, splashed water, and sometimes even debated politics or philosophy. The noise was constant, and privacy was non-existent. Bathing wasn't a quick dip. It involved a series of steps, each with a different room and purpose. You started in the apoditerium, a changing room where attendants might guard your belongings or steal them if they were unscrupulous. Then you moved to the tepidarium, a warm room to relax and sweat gently. Next came the caldarium, the hot bath, often accompanied by a steam room. Finally, you cooled off in the frigidarium, a cold plunge pool. This process took hours and required stamina and patience. The water wasn't always clean. Pools were only partially drained and refilled daily, leading to stagnant water filled with dirt and sweat. Despite the bath's purpose, cleanliness was questionable. Many Romans didn't soap themselves with modern detergents, but used strigil-scurved metal tools to scrape dirt and sweat off their skin after applying olive oil. This scraping method removed oils and grime, but didn't wash away bacteria or germs, which were not understood at the time. Pools were often murky, and the constant use by hundreds created a breeding ground for disease. And there was no gender separation in many bathsmen and women often bathed at different hours or in separate sections, but confusion and mixing occurred, adding to discomfort and social awkwardness. Bathing was also about showing off your body, your status, and your cleanliness, or at least your effort. Romans wore little at the baths, often just a simple loincloth or nothing at all, making the bathhouse a place of vulnerability. Those who appeared dirty or unhealthy might be mocked or excluded. A peasant covered in grime might feel shame or embarrassment among the more polished citizens. For some, the baths were an opportunity to flaunt jewelry or fine perfumes, while others tried to appear as if they belonged, even when they didn't. Public baths attracted more than just clean folk. Pickpockets, prostitutes, and con artists prowled the corridors. Theft was common. Your sandals or money could vanish while you soaked. Sexual activity was rumored to be common in some bathhouses, blurring the line between cleanliness and vice. Officials sometimes tried to police behavior, but enforcement was lax. The atmosphere could be tense, noisy, and unpleasant, far from the serene spa experience we imagine today. Winter bathing was especially challenging. The pools were cold, and the hot rooms didn't always retain heat well. Peasants shivered between rooms, drying themselves on rough towels or not at all. The cold, damp air outside the baths made leaving uncomfortable. And since many bathhouses had no heating in the changing rooms or hallways, getting dressed again was a slow, chilly process. The close quarters and questionable hygiene made bathhouses hotspots for disease. Skin infections, respiratory illnesses, and parasites could spread easily. The Romans had no concept of germs, but observed that sickness sometimes followed bathing. They tried to counteract this with perfumes, fumigations, and rituals, but often with little effect. Despite this, baths remained essential for Manibka's soap, and running water were rare. And washing in cold rivers or wells was less appealing. Not everyone had access to public baths. Peasants in rural areas might wash in rivers, streams, or wells. Bathing was infrequent, especially in cold seasons. Clothing was often worn until visibly dirty or torn, then patched or discarded. Personal hygiene was rudimentary, and bathing was more about practicality than pleasure. Baths weren't just for washing. They were a place to relax, read scrolls, exercise, or discuss politics and business. For the elite, baths were a venue to impress clients or negotiate deals. For ordinary citizens, they were a rare chance to socialize outside home and work. This made them noisy, crowded, and sometimes chaotic. If you were seeking quiet or peace, you'd be disappointed. So, why wouldn't you last a day in Roman bathing culture? The noise, the crowds, the lack of privacy, the questionable cleanliness, and the social pressures could overwhelm you. If you're used to a warm shower alone in your bathroom, imagine being scrapped down with metal tools in a steamy room full of strangers. Imagine trying to relax while dodging pickpockets or nosy neighbors. Tonight, as you relax into your bed, be thankful for your quiet bathroom and hot running water. Let the echoes of splashing baths and shouting bathers fade as you drift into peaceful sleep. Tonight, as you sink deeper into your bed, let your mind wander slowly through the complicated, frustrating world of Roman finances, taxes, rents, and fees that burdened every ordinary citizen. Imagine yourself living in a cramped insula apartment building, trying to keep your family fed and clothed while a steady stream of demands drains your purse and your patience. In this chapter, we'll unravel why surviving financially in the Roman Empire was a constant challenge. The system was complicated, unfair, and designed to keep the wealthy wealthy, while the average person struggled to make ends meet. Let your thoughts meander through ancient ledgers, tax collectors, and landlords as the gentle rhythm of history ease you into a restful state. Taxation in the Roman Empire was widespread and multifaceted. You couldn't escape it, whether you were a farmer, a shopkeeper, a laborer, or even a soldier. The government levied taxes on land, goods, sales, and even people sometimes in the form of a poll tax, a fixed amount everyone owed just for existing. For many, these taxes were a significant burden, consuming a large portion of their income. Imagine a tax collector, a man both feared and loathed, arriving at your door demanding payment. He carried scrolls listing debts, penalties, and previous unpaid amounts. His job was to collect money for Rome's sprawling military campaigns, building projects, and bureaucratic machinery. You might try to hide some income, barter to reduce what you owed, or simply hope to delay payment. But taxes were relentless. Roman taxation wasn't simple. It included tributum soli, a tax on landowners based on the value of their land; tributum capitis, a head tax on individuals; customs duties, taxes on goods crossing city gates or ports; sales taxes, levied on transactions in marketplaces, inheritance taxes, charged on estates passed down after death. Each came with its own rules, rates, and exemptions. Farmers in distant province often faced additional levies from local officials who added their own fees. To collect tax efficiently across such a vast empire, Rome often outsourced this task to private contractors known as publicani. These tax farmers bid for contracts, paid the government up front, and then sought to recoup their money from taxpayers. Unfortunately, this system was rife with corruption. Tax farmers sometimes demanded excessive payments, used intimidation, or seized property to extract more wealth. Imagine them appearing at your home, demanding double the owed amount, threatening imprisonment or property confiscation if you resisted. Many peasants fell into debt or were forced to sell land to pay these collectors. For the majority living in cities, housing was another financial challenge. Most urban Romans rented apartments, scintily from wealthy landlords. These apartments were cramped, often poorly constructed, and prone to fire and collapse. Landlords charged rents that could be high relative to the tenant's income, and eviction was a constant threat if payments fell behind. Picture yourself trying to gather enough coin each month while feeding a family, paying taxes, and dealing with sudden expenses like illness or repairs. Beyond taxes and rent, Romans faced other financial burdens: water fees. Access to city aqueduct water wasn't free. Many paid for fountains or household connections. Guild dues. Craftsmen and traders paid fees to join and maintain membership in their guilds. Market fees. Vendors paid to set up stalls in the marketplace. Tributes to local officials or religious offerings, sometimes unofficial but expected. Every transaction, every service came with a price, often small but cumulatively draining. Because expenses often exceeded income, many Romans fell into debt. Borrowing money was common, but without modern banking protections, debts could lead to severe consequences. If unable to repay, debtors faced imprisonment, forced labor, or even enslavement. Families could be separated or forced to sell possessions. Debt collectors were harsh and unyielding. Their pursuit was relentless, leaving little peace for those struggling. While all classes paid taxes, the burden was uneven. The wealthy found ways to reduce their share through exemptions, bribes, or legal loopholes. The poor and middle classes bore the brunt, paying disproportionately high amounts relative to their income. This inequality bred resentment and hardship. Imagine working hard all day, only to see most of your earnings siphoned away before you can buy food or clothes. This financial pressure shaped every aspect of Roman daily life. Families often ate cheap, repetitive meals, wore worn clothing, and limited social outings to save money. Children might be pulled from school to work, and illness was a constant threat without funds for medical care. Financial stress was a silent but pervasive companion, influencing decisions and future hopes. Romans developed ways to cope, bartering goods and services instead of money, pooling resources with extended family or neighbors, taking on multiple jobs or working long hours, using informal loans from friends or community members. But these were fragile solutions, easily broken by illness, poor harvests, or political upheaval. The relentless financial demands of the Roman Empire meant that many never saw real security or comfort. If you were unlucky, even a minor mishap, a broken tool, a sick child, a late tax payment, could spiral into disaster. So as you close your eyes tonight, take comfort in the stability of your modern finances, no matter how complex. Remember the peasant counting coins under flickering candlelight, hoping the tax collector will pass by without stopping. Sleep peacefully, knowing you don't have to face the endless struggle of Roman taxes and rent comes sunrise. As you settle further into your bed and the quiet darkness wraps around you like a soft blanket, let your mind drift slowly to the kitchens and larders of ancient Rome. Imagine the dim light of oil lamps flickering against stone walls, the pungent smells of fermenting fish, and the constant battle against spoilage and contamination that defined Roman food storage. In this chapter, we explore why preserving food in the Roman Empire was a tricky, often unreliable process, fraught with dangers you wouldn't even consider today. From the absence of refrigeration to the common practice of reusing leftovers and the ever-present threat of foodborne illness, life was a slow, exhausting struggle just to keep something edible on the table. Let your thoughts meander gently through ancient pantries, bustling kitchens, and smoky rooftops as you drift toward peaceful sleep. In the Roman Empire, there were no modern appliances to keep food fresh, no refrigerators humming quietly in the corner, no airtight containers or plastic wrap. Instead, food preservation relied on natural methods: salting, smoking, fermenting, or burying in cool earth. Unfortunately, the Mediterranean climate, especially in summer, was hot and humid, accelerating spoilage. Imagine storing meat or fish in a stone container exposed to the afternoon sun. Within hours, bacteria would multiply rapidly, making the food unsafe to eat. Salt was king in Roman food preservation. Salted meat and fish could last longer and was a staple in many diets. Garum fermented fish sauce was a famous Roman condiment, made by fermenting small fish with salt for months in the sun. It was used liberally, both to add flavor and to mask the taste of less than fresh ingredients. Yet salt was expensive and not always available to the poor. Without enough salt, leftovers spoiled quickly, leaving families hungry or sick. Drying was another common preservation method. Fruits, herbs, and some meats were hung in sunny, breezy areas or near fires. Smoking meat added flavor and extended shelf life, but required constant attention and wood fuel. For many, this was impractical. Picture a small family hanging strips of meat on a rooftop, swatting flies and hoping the rain stays away. Romans also used fermentation and pickling to preserve vegetables and fish. Pickled vegetables were common in wealthier households, but the process required salt, vinegar, and patience. Fermented foods were often pungent and could cause stomach upset, but they added variety to otherwise monotonous diets. Food storage vessels were usually made of clay, wood, or woven baskets. These were porous or permeable, allowing moisture and pests to infiltrate. Sealing containers tightly was difficult. Grain might be stored in large jars, but was vulnerable to weevils and rodents. Imagine waking up to find your stored grain crawling with tiny bugs, your hard-earned harvest ruined. Rats, mice, and insects were constant enemies of Roman food storage. Cities had significant rodent problems due to open sewers and garbage heaps. Grain stored in bulk attracted weevils and other pests that quickly ruined supplies. Households had to be vigilant, using traps or cats to control pests, but infestations were common. Romans did not understand microbes or germs. When food caused illness, they blamed the gods, bad air, miasma, or witchcraft. Without refrigeration, foodborne illnesses were common but invisible threats. People suffered from dysentery, stomach cramps, and worse, often with little effective treatment. Food was precious. Leftovers were rarely discarded. Instead, they were reheated, mixed with sauces, or turned into stews. Unfortunately, reheating didn't kill all bacteria, and cross-contamination was common. Imagine eating yesterday's porridge mixed with new ingredients, unsure if it's truly safe, but too hungry to care. Fresh food was a luxury. Market days were crucial for buying fresh fish, vegetables, and meat, but these goods sold quickly and spoiled fast. Farmers or fishermen often arrived early to sell their wares, and if you missed the morning rush, you settled for less fresh and less tasty options. With all these challenges, no refrigeration, limited preservation methods, pests, and foodborne illness surviving a day, let alone a lifetime, in Roman culinary conditions was a feat. Imagine worrying constantly about whether your next meal would make you sick or spoil before you could eat it. Think of the effort required to keep food edible in a hot, dirty environment with few tools. Tonight, as you rest your head, be thankful for the cool fridge humming softly in your kitchen, the sealed packages that keep food fresh, and the easy access to fresh groceries. Let the distant memory of drying meat and buzzing flies fade into the quiet calm of your room as sleep gently carries you away. As you sink deeper into your bed, feeling the softness of your pillow and the gentle weight of your blanket, let your mind slowly wander to the bustling streets of ancient Rome. Imagine the crowds, the noise, and the peculiar social ritual that was the Roman public bathing experience, far removed from today's peaceful spa visits. Tonight, we explore the reality behind the grandeur of Roman baths. While often portrayed as luxurious centers of relaxation and socializing, the truth is a little less soothing. Between overcrowding, hygiene challenges, and strict social rules, visiting a Roman bath was a complicated ordeal that might leave you more stressed than relaxed. Let your thoughts gently drift through steamy rooms, cold pools, and muddy floors as we unravel the complexities of Roman bathing culture. Public baths or balneae were essential in Roman society. They weren't just places to get clean. They were social hubs, fitness centers, meeting places, and sometimes venues for business deals. Imagine a typical day in Rome where people from all walks of life, slaves, freedmen, soldiers, merchants, and even some elite citizens, gathered to wash, exercise, and chat. Baths usually charged a small entrance fee, affordable to most but still an expense to consider. Some wealthier patrons had private facilities, but the majority used the public baths. Upon arrival, you handed over your coin and entered a sprawling complex featuring a sequence of rooms, changing areas, warm rooms, hot baths, cold baths, exercise yards, and sometimes libraries or snack stalls. Though large, baths were often crowded, especially in major cities. Imagine hundreds of people packed into shared pools and rooms, jostling for space. The noise was constant. Voices raised over the steam, children splashing, merchants hawking snacks or oils. Privacy was nearly impossible, and personal space a luxury. For anyone who preferred solitude or quiet, this was not the place. Despite being places for washing, Roman baths had their hygiene issues. Water was reused throughout the day in pools and tubs, rarely changed except in the largest, best-funded baths. Without modern filtration, pools could become breeding grounds for bacteria and parasites. Imagine stepping into warm, murky water with dozens of others, knowing it had been used all day and that the baths were often breeding grounds for skin diseases. Bathing wasn't simply about soap and water. The process was ritualistic and sometimes uncomfortable. You began by exercising or using the palestra exercise yard to work up a sweat. Then you moved through rooms of gradually increasing temperature, tepidarium warm room, caldarium hot room, and finally a cold plunge bath, frigidarium. Imagine enduring the intense heat of the caldarium filled with steamy humidity, knowing you had to maintain composure in the company of strangers. Instead of soap, Romans used a tool called a strigilla curved metal scraper to remove dirt, sweat, and oils from the skin. Slathering on oil before the bath was common, which the strigil then scraped off along with grime. Picture yourself awkwardly scraping at your skin, surrounded by people doing the same, all the while trying not to slip on wet floors. Some bathhouses is employed attendants who offered massages, hair removal, or even entertainment. These attendants sometimes doubled as pimps or sellers of illicit services, adding another layer of complexity and risk to the experience. If you were unlucky, a visit could become uncomfortable or even dangerous due to unwanted attention or harassment. While baths were social melting pots, they still reflected Roman social hierarchies. Some baths had separate aisles or sections for men and women. Others allowed mixed bathing, but only among certain classes. Elite citizens sometimes had private rooms or exclusive access, while lower classes endured the general crowds. Imagine the heavy mix of sweat, oil, urine, and smoke from nearby furnace is heating the baths. Perfumes and incense were sometimes burned, but the overall smell was far from pleasant. Breathing was often difficult in the hot, crowded rooms, adding to discomfort. For someone used to modern, private, and hygienic bathing, the Roman public baths would be overwhelming. Between the crowds, the smells, the reused water, and the complicated rituals, it was more a test of endurance than relaxation. Imagine struggling to find a clean spot, enduring the heat, navigating social rules, and avoiding unwanted attention, all just to get clean. So tonight, as you close your eyes, be grateful for your quiet bathroom, hot running water, and the privacy of your own shower or bath. Let the memory of crowded, noisy baths fade gently as sleep takes you away into peaceful rest. As you nestle deeper beneath your blanket, feeling the softness against your skin and the quiet rhythm of your breath, allow your thoughts to wander far from your cozy bed and into the vast expanse of the Roman Empire's roadways. Imagine the endless dusty paths stretching under a hot sun, winding through dense forests, barren hills, and tiny villages. These roads, hailed as engineering marvels, were the veins through which the empire's life, its armies, merchants, and travelers pulsed. Yet, while we often admire the Roman roads for their construction and reach, the daily reality for the average traveler was far less glamorous. In this chapter, we will meander slowly down these ancient routes, uncovering the hardships, dangers, and sheer exhaustion involved in any kind of travel during the Roman era. Let your mind drift through the slow shuffle of weary feet on gravel, the creak of overloaded carts, and the ever-present dust cloud trailing behind, as you prepare to slip into restful sleep. Roman roads were indeed feats of engineering. Built to last, with layers of stone and gravel, crowned in the middle for drainage, and often stretching hundreds of miles, they connected the far corners of the empire. But for the traveler, they were long, dusty, and tiring. Imagine walking day after day under the blazing sun, with little shade, your sandals worn thin by the rough surface. Unlike modern roads, there were no rest stops with fresh water fountains or comfortable benches. Travelers had to plan carefully and carry their own supplies. Most common people traveled by foot, as carts and horses were expensive to maintain. Picture yourself setting off from a small village, the morning sun just rising, with a heavy sack on your back. Your feet ache from the rough stones, and the sun's heat soon becomes oppressive. There was no smooth asphalt, only the rough, uneven surface that could twist an ankle or cause blisters. Long marches meant exhaustion and sometimes injury. For those who could afford carts, the journey was no easier. Wooden wheels rattled over stones, shocks transferred through crude suspension, and the driver had little control over speed or direction. Imagine sitting in a cramped cart, swaying side to side, dust filling your nostrils, and your muscles stiff from hours of jolting. Roads were often narrow, forcing wagons to slow for passing traffic or horses. Travel was slow, averaging about 20 miles per day in good conditions. Dust was a constant companion on Roman roads. Dry weather meant clouds of dust kicked up by passing carts and feet, coating travelers from head to toe. In summer, the dust stung eyes and clogged throats. In colder months, mud replaced dust, making travel slippery and messy. Imagine coughing quietly as you trudge along, your clothing heavy with layers of dirt and grime. There were inns or tabernae along the roads, but they were often sparse, overcrowded, and basic. Some inns provided a place to rest, a simple meal, and perhaps shelter from rain. But cleanliness was questionable, beds were hard, and insects plentiful. If you were unlucky, you might share a room with noisy travelers, or endure the smell of stale food and unwashed bodies. Traveling the roads was dangerous. Bandits preyed on lone travelers or small groups, especially in remote areas where Roman authority was weak. Imagine clutching your purse tightly, glancing nervously at the tree line, while your heart races. Wild animals, from wolves to snakes, posed threats as well, especially when roads passed through dense forests. The weather did not cooperate. In winter, roads turned into mud traps, making carts get stuck and travelers slip. Rain was relentless at times, soaking clothing and making fires hard to keep alive at night. Summer's heat was unrelenting, with no shade and little water to cool down. Imagine the chill of wet clothes sticking to your skin, or the burning sun blistering your neck and arms. Roman roads were well mapped for officials and soldiers, but the average traveler often got lost. Signposts existed but were scarce and sometimes confusing. Travelers relied on locals for directions or followed landmarks like rivers or hills. Imagine walking for hours, only to realize you took a wrong turn, adding miles and exhaustion. Roman citizens carried diplomas or documents that granted permission to travel certain roads or regions. Without these, you risked fines, detention, or being treated as a suspicious stranger. Obtaining these papers was time-consuming and expensive. Imagine the stress of keeping these documents safe while traveling. With all these hardships, brutal weather, dust, bandits, exhaustion, and discomfort, it's easy to see why a day of travel on Roman roads could break even the hardiest soul. Imagine waking at dawn, setting off with aching muscles, enduring dust, filled air, dodging bandits, struggling to find shelter, and finally collapsing on a hard bed only to wake and do it all again. So tonight, as you settle down, be grateful for smooth highways, air-conditioned cars, and GPS that guides you effortlessly. Let the dust, noise, and weariness of Roman travel fade into the quiet hum of your peaceful night. As your body relaxes further into the comforting embrace of your bed, your breathing slowing and your muscles softening, let your mind drift to an ancient problem every Roman peasant and city dweller faced daily: how to keep food edible without modern conveniences. Imagine the cool, dark cellars, smoky kitchens, and sun-baked rooftops where Romans struggled to preserve their meals, battling heat, pests, and the relentless march of spoilage. Tonight, we explore the tedious and precarious art of food storage in the Roman Empire, a slow, sometimes smelly, always necessary process that could mean the difference between a full belly and hunger. So, let your thoughts wander through crumbling granaries, jars of Syr wine, and buckets of oily fish sauce, as you slip deeper into restful sleep. Unlike the hum of your refrigerator humming softly in the corner of your kitchen, Romans had no cool storage to keep perishables fresh. Without refrigeration, food spoilt quickly, especially in the Mediterranean heat. Imagine a summer day in Rome, the sun beating down on wooden shelves laden with bread, fruits, and salted meats. By midday, the bread turns hard and stale, fruits soften and ferment, meats begin to smell. Food storage was a constant battle against time, requiring careful planning and quick consumption. Romans made use of cellars and underground storage to keep things cooler. Many homes had small, dark basements where grains, dried fruits, and preserved foods were kept. Clay pots and amphorae, sealed with wax or pitch, stored liquids like olive oil, wine, and garum fermented fish sauce. Imagine the dim light of a cellar, the earthy smell of damp stone mixed with the sharp tang of fermenting liquids. Drying was a common way to preserve food. Fruits, herbs, and fish were laid out in the sun, losing moisture to prevent spoilage. Salting meat and fish was another essential technique. Salt drew out water and prevented bacterial growth, allowing food to last longer. However, salt was costly and not always plentiful, making preservation an expensive process. Picture piles of salted fish hanging in the market, emitting a pungent aroma that both attracted buyers and repelled many. Grain was the staple food source, essential for bread and porridge. Romans stored grain in large clay jars or wooden bins, but pests like weevils and rodents often invaded. A poorly stored grain supply could be ruined quickly, threatening food security. Imagine the anxiety of a peasant guarding a grain bin, listening for the rustle of mice, and waking to find some of the precious stock gone. Wine was often stored in amphorae and could last longer than other perishables due to its alcohol content. Garum, the salty fermented fish sauce that flavored many dishes, was also preserved by salt and fermentation. Yet both could spoil or turn rancid if exposed to heat or poor sealing. Imagine opening a jar only to be hit by a sour, almost unbearable smell, forcing you to discard what was once valuable. Romans had to adapt their diets according to what was seasonally available and could be preserved. Winter was a time of scarcity. Fresh vegetables were rare, and preserved foods dominated. Summer offered fresh produce, but also the risk of rapid spoilage. Picture the cycle of food availability dictating the rhythm of life, where families ate hearty porridge and salted meats in winter and fresh fruits and vegetables in summer. Rodents were a major problem in storage areas. Rats and mice not only ate stored grains, but also contaminated food with their droppings, leading to illness. Cats were sometimes kept to control the rodent population, but they were not a guaranteed solution. Imagine the frustration and fear as you find spoiled grain and evidence of pests, knowing that a bad harvest or poor storage could mean hunger. Spoiled food was not only unpleasant but dangerous. Without knowledge of bacteria, Romans sometimes ate tainted food, leading to sickness. Strong spices and sauces were used to mask off flavors, but often only partially succeeded. Imagine forcing down a meal that smells sour and tastes strange, hoping it won't cause stomach pain later. Food was precious, and storage areas were often targets for theft. Peasants and merchants alike had to guard their supplies carefully. Some built strong storage rooms with locked doors or hidden compartments. Imagine the paranoia of waking to noise is at night, fearing someone is trying to steal your last sacks of grain. In a world without refrigeration or reliable preservation, you needed constant vigilance, knowledge, and a strong stomach. The slow spoilage of food, the smells, the pests, and the ever-present risk of illness made food storage a daily challenge. Imagine waking each day worried whether your next meal would still be edible, hunting for dry wood to cook quickly, and enduring the smell of sour wine or rancid fish. So tonight, as you feel the cool comfort of your food, safe kitchen, the gentle hum of your fridge, and the ease of opening a fresh package, be grateful. Let the slow rot and rancid smells of Roman food storage fade away as you slip peacefully into deep, undisturbed sleep. As you settle deeper into your comfortable bed, wrapped in soft linens and surrounded by the quiet stillness of your room, let your imagination drift to a place of steam, noise, chatter, and less than perfect hygiene. Roman baths, these public bathing complexes, were an essential part of daily Roman life, but they were far from the relaxing spa experience you might imagine today. Tonight, we'll slowly wander through the warm and sometimes stifling corridors of the Roman thermae, exploring the sights, sounds, and smells that filled these communal spaces. We'll take a long, unhurried look at the challenge is of bathing in a crowded, open environment where cleanliness was an ideal rather than a reality, and social norms often clashed with personal comfort. Close your eyes and let the image of marble pools, steamy rooms, and the murmur of hundreds of bathers gently lull you closer to rest. Baths weren't just about hygiene, they were social centers place, is for business deals, gossip, relaxation, and exercise. Most Romans visited the baths daily or several times a week, regardless of social class. But unlike modern private bathrooms, these were large public complexes where privacy was limited and personal space scarce. Imagine walking into a massive hall filled with dozens of people, the air thick with steam and mixed scents of sweat, oils, and unwashed bodies. A typical therme included several rooms: the apoditerium changing room, frigidarium cold pool, tepidarium warm room, and caldarium hot steam bath. There were also exercise yards, massage rooms, and sometimes libraries or lecture halls. Visitors moved slowly from one room to the next, following a ritual of cleansing, soaking, and sweating. Picture the slow progression through these rooms, your skin adjusting from cold water to scorching steam. Baths were crowded. On a busy day, hundreds could be packed into a single complex, men and women usually bathing at separate times or in separate areas. Conversations ranged from lively debates to loud gossip. The noise of splashing water, scraping strigils, scraping tools, and shuffling feet echoed through the halls. Imagine trying to relax with dozens of strangers just inches away, voices rising and falling in a constant din. Despite the crowds, there were rules about behavior sort of. Bathers were expected to be modest, but clothes were typically removed entirely. Nudity was normal and accepted, but men and women rarely bathed together, except at some private baths. Visitors had to share benches and pools, often with strangers. Imagine awkwardly squeezing between groups, trying to avoid eye contact while balancing your towel and oil flask. Despite the clean water, baths were not always fragrant. The mix of sweat, oils, dirt, and sometimes urine created a pungent atmosphere. Without modern sewage systems fully effective inside, some bathhouse is smelled of stale water and damp stone. Add the scents of perfumes, scented oils, and the occasional animal presence, and the air was a complex, sometimes unpleasant bouquet. Imagine taking a deep breath and catching hints of mildew, musk, and sire sweat. Romans didn't use soap. Instead, they applied oils to their skin, then scraped them off with a curved metal tool called a strigil. This process removed dirt and dead skin, but it was sticky and messy. Imagine your arms slick with oil, the harsh scraping sensation of the strigil, and the gritty residue washing down the drain. Water was often reused and not frequently changed. Pools could become breeding grounds for bacteria and parasites. Bathers risked skin infections, eye irritation, and even more serious diseases. Imagine dipping into warm water, only to emerge itching or with red eyes. Staff kept the fires burning under the hypo, cossed the heating system, and cleaned the pools. Some attendants offered massages, while others sold snacks or oils. Jobs were hard and low status, often performed by slaves or freedmen. Imagine the heat of the furnace rooms, the smoke, filled air, and the endless work to keep everything running. Some baths were free or subsidized by the emperor, but many charged admission. The poor might only afford occasional visits, while wealthier citizens frequented the best facilities. Public baths were places of social mixing, but also of class tension. Imagine paying a small fee and trying to find space on a crowded bench, surrounded by people from all walks of life. In this humid, crowded environment filled with strange smells, sticky oils, and noisy crowds, it's easy to imagine feeling overwhelmed and exhausted. Trying to keep modesty, navigate social rules, avoid skin infections, and find any peace was a challenge. So tonight, as you sink deeper into your soft sheets, grateful for your private bathroom and hot shower, let the steamy baths of ancient Rome fade quietly into the background. Rest easy, knowing you don't need to endure the noisy, smelly, crowded chaos of a Roman therme to be clean. As the quiet of the night deepens around you, let your thoughts wander to the vast network of Roman roads stretching across the empire. These roads were marvels of ancient engineering, connecting cities, forts, and provinces from Britain to Egypt. Yet, despite their fame, the experience of traveling on them was far from comfortable or swift for the average Roman traveler or soldier. Tonight, we take a slow, leisurely journey along these ancient highways, imagining the dust, the mud, the noise of carts and animals, and the constant struggle against the elements. As your breathing steadies and your muscles relax, picture the hardships and tedium of travel before cars, paved highways, or comfortable inns, when every mile was a test of endurance. Roman roads were built primarily for military purposes, to move troops quickly across the empire. Over 400 km of roads linked Rome's vast territories, with the famous Via Appia connecting Rome to southern Italy. Civilians also used the roads for trade, pilgrimage, and relocation, though travel was slow and often dangerous. Imagine the vast expanse of dusty roads stretching out ahead under a scorching sun or in driving rain. Roman engineers built roads with several layers, large stones for drainage, crushed stones for stability, and smooth paving stones on top. Roads were crowned in the middle to allow water runoff. Though sturdy, the surface could still be rough, uneven, and full of loose gravel. Imagine your feet or wagon wheels jostled by the uneven stones, the clatter of wooden wheels bouncing along, and the grit in the air. In dry weather, roads turned to choking dust bowls. Travelers raised thick clouds with every step or wheel turn. The dust coated clothes, stung eyes, and clogged mouths and noses. Imagine walking for miles, your throat dry and your skin gritty, your clothes heavy with dirt. When rain came, roads became a slippery, sucking mess. Mud clogged wheels, boots sank deep, and horses struggled. Some parts turned into quagmires where wagons stuck fast for hours or days. Picture a slow, exhausting march through knee-deep mud, boots soaked, your cloak heavy with wet earth. Unlike modern rest stops, roadside inns' mansions were scarce and basic. Some were little more than wooden huts with dirt floors. Clean water, food, and shelter were not guaranteed. Travelers often had to rely on charity or camp outdoors. Imagine a cold, noisy night on a creaking bench, sharing space with snoring strangers and rodents. Travelers faced dangers from highwaymen and bandits, especially outside city walls. Military patrols sometimes provided protection, but their presence was inconsistent. Carrying valuables made you a target. Imagine clutching your purse tightly, glancing nervously into the woods, hoping to avoid an ambush. Wagons were slow and prone to breakdown. Broken wheels, spooked horses, and overburdened animals delayed journeys. Mules and oxen needed rest and feeding, which wasn't always easy on barren stretches. Imagine the creak of a broken axle, the smell of manure, and the tired groans of animals pulling heavy loads. Sun protection was minimal. Travelers suffered from sunburn, dehydration, and heat stroke. Shade was rare, and water sources could be miles apart. Imagine the relentless sun burning your skin, the sweat soaking your tunic, and the endless horizon offering no relief. A journey that seems short today could take days or weeks. A 50-mile trip might require a week on foot. Delays were common, and you couldn't rely on fast passage. Imagine marking each painful step, counting miles with aching feet and sore shoulders. Imagine marking each painful step, counting miles with aching feet and sore shoulders. The reality of traveling the Roman roads was slow, dirty, and exhausting. Without modern gear, reliable food, or safe lodging, each mile was a battle. So as you settle further into the softness of your bed, breathing slowing and body relaxed, let the dust, mud, and rattle of ancient Roman travel fade away. Feel grateful for smooth roads, comfortable vehicles, and quick journeys. Sleep now, peaceful and safe, far from the endless march along those harsh Roman roads. As you nestle deeper beneath your covers, the world outside growing quiet and still, allow your mind to drift toward the reality of ancient Roman kitchens and food storage, a topic less glamorous than you might expect. Without refrigerators, freezers, or modern preservatives, storing food in the Roman Empire was a daily challenge filled with risk, unpleasant smells, and constant vigilance. Tonight, we'll slowly explore how Romans tried to keep their food edible, what kinds of food they stored, and the grim reality behind their daily meals. Imagine cool cellars full of jars, smoky pantries, and baskets of grain, some fresh, some spoiled, and many vulnerable to pests or decay. As your breathing steadies, picture the ancient effort to stave off hunger and illness in a world without modern conveniences. Romans stored food in a variety of containers, clay jars, wooden boxes, woven baskets, and sometimes metal pots. Grains like wheat and barley were staples, kept in dry, cool places to avoid mold and pests. Dried foods, salted meats, and fermented items were common, since fresh food didn't last long. Imagine a dim cellar filled with sacks of grain, pots of oil, and barrels of pickled vegetables. Without refrigeration, fresh meat, dairy, and fish spoiled quickly, especially in warm climates. Romans relied heavily on salting, smoking, and drying to preserve perishables. Despite these methods, spoilage was common and food poisoning a regular hazard. Imagine the disappointment of finding your freshly caught fish reeking after a few hours in the sun. Salt was the key to preserving many foods. Salted pork, ham, and fish were staples, stored in barrels or hung in cool, dry areas. Salt not only prevented bacteria, but also added flavor. Imagine the strong, briny scent of salted meats filling a storage room. Romans fermented fish into garum, a pungent sauce loved and hated across the empire. Vegetables were pickled to extend their shelf life. Fermentation could mask spoilage, but sometimes made food smell worse. Imagine the sharp tang of fermented vegetables mixing with the overpowering aroma of garum. Grain was stored carefully, as it was the foundation of bread and porridge. However, grain was vulnerable to rodents, insects, and moisture. Infestations could ruin entire stores, leading to hunger. Imagine the frustration of opening a sack only to find it crawling with weevils or full of mold. Food storage areas attracted pests eager for easy meals. Rats and mice roamed freely, gnawing through sacks and containers. Insects infested grain and dried goods. Romans tried to keep pests out with simple barriers and traps, but success was limited. Imagine the constant battle to protect food from these relentless invaders. Stored foods often emitted strong odors. Rotting produce, salted meats, and fermenting sauces mingled into a pungent cloud. Poor hygiene led to mold growth and bacterial contamination. Imagine the stench of a poorly maintained food cellar, a mixture of sour, salty, and musty smells. Wine was stored in amphoreclay vessels sealed with pitch or resin. Oil, essential for cooking in lamps, was similarly stored. Both could spoil or go rancid if not properly sealed. Imagine the slow drips of olive oil staining cellar floors and the sticky residue coating amphorae. Roman food storage had to account for seasons. Summer heat sped spoilage, winter cold slowed it. Bad harvests or supply disruptions caused shortages. Imagine the anxiety of running low on staples while waiting for the next harvest or supply caravan. The constant threat of spoilage, pests, and contamination meant Romans faced an ongoing struggle just to keep food edible. Without refrigeration, safe storage was a daily challenge requiring vigilance and luck. As you drift closer to sleep, appreciate the modern marvel of your fridge and pantry cool, clean and secure. Let the damp, pungent cellars of ancient Rome fade softly away as you relax into warmth and quiet. As your body sinks deeper into comfort and your mind drifts toward peaceful sleep, take a moment to reflect on the journey we've shared through the dusty streets, muddy roads, crowded markets, and cramped, smoky rooms of the Roman Empire. Life then was slow, harsh, and full of challenges that would quickly overwhelm anyone used to the modern world's conveniences. Though the Romans left behind incredible legacies of architecture, law, and culture, the daily realities for most people were grueling. Harsh weather, unreliable food, dangerous travel, primitive hygiene, and constant uncertainty marked their lives. Tonight, you've glimpsed these struggles in detail, from the awkward clatter of wooden wheels on uneven roads to the pungent scent of fermented fish sauce filling a market. You've imagined the weary feet, the rough clothing, the careful guarding of every coin. And now, as the quiet of your room embraces you, let yourself be thankful for what you have. Clean water at the turn of a tap, fresh food stored safely, cars that whisk you along smooth roads, beds that keep you warm and dry. The ancient world may have fascinated us, but it was no place to linger. So, close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let the slow, steady pulse of history lull you into a restful, undisturbed sleep. Good night.